Hello, welcome to this overview on Procreate for Pastelist. I'm Barry Dodge, and I've been teaching Procreate since 2017. So, what can you do with Procreate? What is this application? Well, it's an iPad app that runs on your iPad, can use your iPad pencil. So let's look at some examples. Line work can certainly be done with or without a background. It's also great for shading, whether you're working on draperies or if you just want to do some strict black and white line work with a little bit of additional shading. You can also use it, has some built-in guides so you can set up some perspectives. And of course, you can also bring in color. And here's color combined with some shading. You can also work in a very clunky style or a very wispy style, or even some styles that sort of look like pastels. And you can also use it for wondering what would happen if the great artists of the past had to use Zoom. Here's an example of using watercolor backgrounds or digital backgrounds from other applications. And of course, it's also wonderful for cartooning. You can document your trip to Palm Springs with some wacky furniture, or a trip to Seattle and overlooking the public market, or a trip to a tropical island, or maybe that curve on the road to Hana, or maybe add some texture to that road to Hana picture you did. Here's an example of some trip to San Diego and a trip, of course, to the ice cream shop, and an important trip to get that vaccine. Here's an example of Finn, and here's a javelina, show some fur, and of course, you have to show some feathers also. Another series I always enjoy doing is 12 Days of Christmas, doing it in various different styles, often using birds, since it starts a lot of the courses begin with birds. So, how can a pastelist use this application?
So what tools does Procreate provide? Let's open up the Procreate app. The first place you'll probably end up is what they call this gallery, which shows all your drawings, either laid out flatly or they can be lumped together in what they call a stack. So that this is a stack that I named 30 Days June 2022 for our the most recent mini challenge. So you have ways of organizing and grouping stuff together. There's a little, you can do some minor kind of file maintenance kind of stuff in here. You can, if you select a drawing, you can then preview it, which just shows it full size. You can share it out. So in this case, this would export this selected drawing, or if you had multiple ones selected, in any of these formats. So you have your standard JPEG, PNG, and TIFF. Usually I'll go out as a JPEG. That's a very common way that you save photographs. And if you save it as a JPEG, you have the option to send it out to your photo library, which is this option here, Save Image. So any way you can have a photo printed, you can then have your Procreate item printed. You can also duplicate an item. It's a good way to do what ifs. And also, likewise, you can change the name of the item. Let's see, let's call this Lighthouse Copy. Done. So I have a lighthouse that I've copied. Really didn't need that one. I'm going to select it again and delete. What is nice is if you're going to delete something, it always asks, are you sure you want to do that? In this case, I am sure, so I'm going to go ahead and delete it. Okay. So I'm going to go back into the normal browse mode. You can also use this, these controls up here to import a photo or to take a photo if you want to work that way. This little plus sign allows you to say, what size canvas do I want to work on? Now, a digital canvas is a little different in that you're working with pixels. It does understand different sizes. I set up a lot of them so that I know that they will print cleanly if I do decide to print. So in this case, I have this 10 by 8. This is a landscape orientation. And I set it so it is 300 pixels by 2400 pixels. So 10 times 300 dots per inch, 10 times 2400 dots per inch. Generally, once these are set up, you can kind of forget it. It does come with some pre-set-up sizes. You'll also see that I also set up HDTV. I often do my video titles within this application because it's what I'm most familiar with. So I'm going to go ahead and create, we'll just do this 10 by 8. Whoops, there we go. So as you see, I can resize this canvas. I can make it very tiny. I could then go in and, let's say we're going to do a little sketch. We'll do a palm tree, do some fir trees, do a little ocean. Maybe there's a mountain across the way. So you can do, it's kind of like you're doing a thumbnail, but here we are, we can blow it up full size. As you see right now, the line I'm drawing is kind of this milky tan color. So if I click on this little dot over here, I have access to all these different colors. And you have different ways of getting to them. This is a very common interface you'll see in some other applications. This is where I do have a strong dislike of this. I like this classic view. This classic view, it only shows you one hue at a time, but you can control that with this slider right underneath. But it gives you from full intensity, 100% saturation, and it also gives you the full value range from white to black to gray, and any combo of that for that particular hue. Often you can do so much just using one hue and just changing the value. Why not let the hue be sit in the back seat while you work with the values? So let's say I want to do a black line. So here I am with a very strong black line. I can change how wide that line is. I can make that line very, very narrow. So narrow that we have to zoom in to see it. So narrow that we're actually seeing the individual pixels. As you see, 2 fingers, I can pinch in and out. I can also rotate. This is great if you're trying to draw a diagonal line and you're not quite getting it right. Well, just like you have a piece of paper and you rotate that piece of paper, you can rotate your image here on this canvas. Also over here on this slider is how opaque is your line going to be. So at the top of this first slider, it's 100% opaque. I can drop it down. I can be, 100% opaque. Here we are, very translucent, as you can see. Let me zoom in. I can slowly build up color that way, or intensity. So I can go from a very light value to a very thick value. I also have one other option, this little button here in the middle. I've set that up so I can say, let me automatically draw a straight line. Sometimes you do need those straight lines, and it's nice to have an application that supports that and lets you move them around. However, once they're moved around, you can't move them around anymore unless you copy and paste them out of there. At the bottom here, you have an undo button. So I can click that. I can get rid of those lines. I can take this all the way back. So I've totally gotten rid of the line blob I had here. Underneath undo, I can then redo. So I can bring that back the way it was. So that's kind of nice. It also supports a 2-finger press to do an undo. And a 3-finger redo. Let's see, I think we already drew a line on top of that. So if we have a chunk and we undo it, I can then redo it. Now, right now I'm just using this round brush. You'll see when you click on the brush, you come to a brush library. Within the brush library, you have what these call brush sets. These are kind of like your different jars of brushes that you have sitting around your studio. They come in all sorts of varieties. You can buy third-party brush sets. You can also customize these. I do sometimes do minor customizations to brushes, and sometimes I create brand new ones. It's always kind of fun playing with that, but that is a deep, deep rabbit hole to go down. So any of these brushes can also be used as a smudge tool or as an eraser. Let's take a look at the eraser first. So you'll see we have the exact same brushes, but now if I have this big wide eraser, so this is going to take stuff off of this layer. I can also make that a smaller eraser. I can go very tiny. And I can also say, let me make this reduce the opacity of this eraser. So instead of erasing 100%, it's just going to slowly erase it out. So this is great for doing like a feathered edge or just softening an area. Also quite addicting. Now I can also go back, just do a huge erase. Now I also have the smudge tool. Smudge tool allows you to, it's like blending with your finger. And again, let's go back and I will choose that same round brush, but now it's going to be a smudging tool. So basically it's going to be allowing me to move whatever is on this layer, kind of like moving around charcoal or pastels with your finger. So pretty darn neat. This next icon over here is layers. So just like in painting with pastels or painting with, say, acrylics, you can add another layer on top, do something completely different. So I'm going to choose some bright colors. I'll choose a totally saturated red. We can choose a less saturated green. Let's look at this bright yellow here. I'm going to make that bigger. And let's smear these colors around. Now what you'll notice, let me add some more red to that, is when I'm smearing together a couple of colors, it's not actually grabbing those browns, the black from underneath. It's just smearing on this particular layer. In fact, I can turn off the layer below. So now I'm just seeing the stuff that's on this particular color layer. And unlike with pastels and with acrylics. Once I do a layer, I can still move the layer around. So in this case, I move that color layer underneath this black and white-ish layer. So think of it as more like the animation studios, and they're doing a multi-cell animation where they have a background animation and they have character cells on top. So let's take a peek what else we can do with this. I can add more layers. I could also bring in a photograph if I wanted to do, say, a collage. So I go to this action menu, I can say add, I can insert a photo from my iPad's photo library. Grab this guy. So here's this illustration of an Italian pepper grinder. So I can put that in there. As you can see, it got inserted below this black smeary layer, so if I wanted to, I can move that out of the way. But you will notice how it brought apart all the white background for that particular photograph. Now, this was an illustration that I created within Procreate. I saved it out to the photo library, and then I brought it back in this manner. I also have the ability to say how these layers blend together. So what I could do is fade this in and out. And I could also say, how does this layer interact with the layers below it? So I have all these different controls here. Basically, if you're doing simple drawings, you don't need to worry about these. You just work in this, what is called the normal mode. There's normal. It's marked with this little N. And that's good enough for the work you're doing. You also have access to the background color. So if you are, think of this as making automatic tone to paper. So here I have I'm now using a light gray toned paper. Let me take this photograph out of there, turn it off temporarily. But unlike tone paper, you can go in here and change what the tone is later. Pretty cool. Procreate also has some additional tools. One that's kind of interesting is, especially if you're working on compositions, I'm going to move this layer up to the top. Oops, if it will let me. There we go. And I'm just going to turn off those other layers right now. Let's say I wanted to copy part of this pepper mill. So in this case, I'm going to drag down with my 3 fingers rather than just tapping with 3 fingers. I'm going to say copy. I'm going to do that again, 3 fingers. I'm going to say paste. It pasted it in the exact same spot, but you see it has this, if you zoomed in, it would have these little marching lines around it. So I can move that, so I now have 2 pepper mills. And I can play with how these guys interact. There we go. Just change one to darken mode, and it is allowing the colors to, whoops, I accidentally painted. 2 fingers, I'll undo. I'll grab this layer. I'm going to grab my little move tool, just over here, so I can move this guy around. Kind of fun. You can also do kind of weird effects with that if you just slightly offset stuff. Or you can also turn stuff around. In case you have a upside down pepper mill. I can also select individual pieces. So here I have this little S is for select, this little S for selection. Got it. So now I can move it around. I'll leave it over here for right now. Maybe I want to change that background back to white. So now we have the broken pepper mill, part of the pepper mill over here, and this other one upside down. So how useful is that? Well, let's say you're working on a pastel. Let me just open up a whole new. So from the gallery, I want to import a photo. So I'm going to go to my albums within my photo library, and I have put a copy of this particular pastel painting in that library. So what I want to do is kind of make this pop. The Palo Verde flowers coming off of this tree are, granted they're small, but they really should pop more. This fence below is just way too red. It really needs to be much more muted. And there is this object over here. This is a Madagascar palm. Really would like that bigger. And probably a different trunk. So let's go ahead and do that first. So what I'm going to do is create a layer. I have the option to pick up that color of the trunk right now. And what I'm going to do is add another trunk to that. What I may want to do is grab that color a couple different times. So I have a lighter and a darker one. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller so I can add some little spines to that guy. Might make those spines a little bit darker. Let's make those a little whiter too so we can see them. And I kind of like this foliage, so I'm just going to kind of copy some colors from there. As you see, I'm just sticking my finger down. When I stick my finger down, I get this little circle, and that lets me know that I picked up that yellow. It shows it up here. That's the active color. And right now, since I'm just playing what if, I don't really care that this brush doesn't really look like a pastel. Basically, I just want to get the leaf and its highlights. Okay, so that adds a little bit more movement to that area. Maybe those leaves need to be a bit bigger. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my little selection guy. I'm going to freehand around it. I'm going to grab my little move tool. Move tool puts this little marching ants around what you selected. And I'm in this uniform mode down here, so I can make that a little bit bigger. Let's make that quite a bit bigger. Let's see what that looks like. So yeah, that really brings that Madagascar palm forward. Much better. Now what to do with this wall? Probably a couple different ways to handle this. Right now, let's just select that area and see if we can play with the color. I'm going to go to turn off that new layer, go back to this layer. So I'm back to layer 1. And what I'm going to do is select all of this stuff. And right now I'm using these ellipses to select with, which is kind of a silly way to do it, but you can do it that way. Then I can remove some stuff. We don't need this. And we don't need any of that stuff. Let's also remove some of these flowers. Let's remove, 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 remove. remove. So let's see what we can do with this background. So I'm going to use these adjustment layers. I'm going to go into this hue, saturation, and brightness. Just let me change multiple things at a time. So if we darken that, yeah, it makes stuff pop, but it also makes the tree trunks kind of fall out. What we could do is reduce the saturation. I think that's what we really want. So I'm going to back that off. Might bring the brightness of that up a little bit. Let's see where we're at. Right now it's very kind of brownish. What if we make that a little bit more yellow? Let's see what we like about that. Nah. Let's go ahead and take that back to where it was. Anyway, let's see how this looks. Okay, we certainly got the flowers popping. Let's put that arm back in. So automatically I am beginning to like this. We have the flowers popping. We still have the trunk of the tree showing. We may want to lighten this trunk a little bit more. But I think we have some good ideas of what we could do to our pastel painting at this point. Let's see, what else can we do composition-wise with this? One thing is we're down low, we're looking up through the trees to see these blossoms. We could put something up in the sky. That would be an option. One thing that I often see in the spring, I'm going to add, because these trees have bright green bark and they have these bright yellow flowers. Not unusual. At all. To see a little cardinal up in these trees. And when you see those up in those trees, boy, do they ever pop. So there we go. I think that would be a funner composition. Lines that kind of take you through, but you'll stop when you get to the bird. Another option you could add, if you want a secondary point, you could add a lizard on top of the wall doing push-ups. But I'm fairly happy with that at this point. So I'm just going to go back to the gallery, and I'm going to do a select both of those, say preview. So here's the after, and here's the before. Now I'd still have to do this in pastel, but kind of gives me an idea of what I want to do. So I'm happy with that. Now I talked about how we could put these into stacks, just kind of lump them together. So for that, all I do is have to put my finger on there, drag it, put it on top of the other one, plop, it creates a stack. I can create I can name that. We'll just call it Palo Verde Blossoms. And what I may want to do is name these. We'll call this after. I'll call this, oops, clicked on it, didn't click small, there we go. I'll call this one before. So cool. Now, one thing I did mention that you can add text. You probably wouldn't want to set an entire essay in this application. If you're doing a short poem, haiku, adding titles, perfectly fine for that. Another good thing about Procreate, generally people won't complain if you're bringing Procreate on a tablet to bed. You bring a box of pastels and everybody looks at you funny. One thing that I know that people sometimes have issues with is they'll do some work in Procreate and it will look kind of garish color-wise to them. What has usually happened is they're enjoying this huge color gamut you have. So this top right corner, this is strongest color right out of the tube. Generally on colors, I kind of pretend that there's a line here and I try not to go too saturated. Of course, with the exception of yellow, because never hurts to crank up yellow. So that's one way to keep control of it. So your drawings don't have to look electronic. If you're from a video game generation and you do like stuff looking totally electric, you can certainly do that. Does it feel like drawing on paper? That's a question I get asked. No. It feels like you're drawing with a plastic stylus on glass. You can get a screen protector that you put on top of the iPad that adds a texture. I have some friends that have done that and they're very happy with that. Does this replace a sketchbook? It could. It's not something you can, you have to turn it on, where a sketchbook, all you have to do is pull it out of the bookcase and start paging through. Another question I get asked a lot is, do I need an Apple Pencil? I have used it without a pencil. It is possible. The pencils are somewhere between $100 and $130 US, depending on which iPad you have. It's a great addition. I think you'll be happier with a pencil than without. Do I need a high-end iPad? No, you do not. I would get one that has plenty of storage. The thing is with iPads is they generally last a long time for me, so 5 years or so. And so get something that can grow with you. Those are probably the common questions. I'm always happy to take more questions. You can get a hold of me at, let's show you. I'm going to insert some text. I'm going to grab a bright color. And you can get a hold of me at beardodge@mac.com. So I hope you enjoyed this little quick tour. Always around to answer questions. Thank you.